But this is the one you got to talk about because this game's terrifying. And I think we've talked about this a lot on the show. I think 8:15 kickoffs in Provo are where the visitor goes to die. And that needs to be the case this weekend. BYU style points matter. When you are not everybody's All-American and your name doesn't start with Alabama and your conference doesn't start with the SEC, you need style points. And one of my biggest questions about Kalani Sitake has always been, is he willing to garner style points? I think it's a huge question. And when you look at where BYU is, obviously we're talking about a team that controls its own destiny. If they run the table, they probably are in no matter what happens in the college football playoff. Whether they win the Big 12 championship or not, I think if BYU wins these next 3 games, they're in the college football playoff, which would be one of the most remarkable stories I think we have ever seen in college football. And I think, again, the bigger question is, can they win this Kansas game? Because what happens going forward doesn't matter. Can they win this Kansas game? I think Kansas is one of the most lethal running attacks that we've seen in college football this year. Certainly in this conference, they're one of the best running teams in this conference. When they run, including Jalen Daniels, they win. But you have a really fast and physical linebacking core, and you have a secondary that tackles well. The question is, can this BYU defense be disciplined enough? And can this BYU defense stop the run and contain Jalen Daniels enough to win this football game? Jake, I think that's one of the biggest questions.
Absolutely. I think that BYU's propensity to give up yards on the ground is something that has to be talked about in this game as we head up to it or lead up to it. I think, my biggest concern here is that you have a team in Kansas that has a mobile quarterback and a really good running back. And those two together can give BYU problems, and the thing with Oklahoma State in that game was that, you just didn't execute your run defense scheme. And so Ollie ran all over you. And in this game, I don't think that they're going to struggle to stop the run in this game. Like, Kansas will run the ball, but I don't think you're going to get gashed in this game. I could be wrong, but I'm just thinking you're preparing for a team that their primary attack offensively is running the football. Jalen Daniels is not some prolific thrower of the football. So to me, if you're BYU, you're preparing this whole week for, hey, we really got to tackle. Can't have missed tackles this week, and we really got to be disciplined to our assignments, right? We got to be assignment sound, as everybody always says. We got to have our gap discipline and be in the right place at the right time, taking good angles. And I think if you do that, you're going to be just fine in this game, because what ultimately the defense has to do is put Kansas in 3rd and 6 plus every time. That's where you need to be. You need to be in down and distance where it's a passing situation, where you're not going to run the football to try to get the first down. So if you think about it, if Kansas is playing most of the game offensively on BYU's side of the 50, that's going to be a big problem for BYU. But if BYU can hold them down, push them back, keep them in their own end of the field, I think you're going to see a really quality performance as far as BYU is concerned. And for me, I would expect that out of a BYU team. It's going to be cold. It's at night. It's at Lavelle. Crowd's going to be crazy. We know what this environment is. So for me, I'm not concerned about this game, but I think there are several core things that BYU has to do in order to win against a team like Kansas.
I think the biggest question is who wins the turnover battle, because that's going to determine the game. KU has not beat an FBS level competitor this year when it has a single turnover in a game. It is 0-6 when it doesn't produce 467 yards of offense in a game. They need 467 yards of offense to win a game. Let that sink in. They're 0-6 when they finish below that. BYU's defense is fast and physical. They take the football away at an exceptional level. Kansas seems to enjoy giving the ball away. I understand that you beat Iowa State. I understand that you love playing spoiler here. I don't believe it happens in Provo tomorrow night. I think the biggest question is 56.5 points.
Right.
I think BYU wins this game and covers that number. I have no doubt about that.
And to your point, 9 interceptions for Jalen Daniels on the season.
Yeah, I think I'm curious who comes out in a hot start. I think Kansas does. And I think BYU runs Kansas down because it's at altitude in low 30s, high 20s weather. I think BYU will run Kansas down. I think this is a come from behind win. And I think it is something in the order of 37-34. BYU wins the game.
Yeah, you look at you look at last week for Kansas playing Iowa State, and it's not like that was some scintillating throwing performance out of Jalen Daniels. I mean,
No.
12 of 24, 295 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. But you start to look at the rushing attack, and that's where this whole situation of, I'm telling you, Devin Neal and Jalen Daniels together turn this offense into sort of like this two-headed attack, and then they work off of that. And, I look at Devin Neal last week against Iowa State's defense, and I know Iowa State hasn't been playing as well. That defense, for whatever reason, has fallen off a little bit. But, 18 carries for 116 yards, 6.4 average, 2 touchdowns. So not only do they lean on him in the red zone, they're leaning on him to work down the field. So to me, when I look at this game, I look at, Kansas' game against Iowa State last week, and I say, hey, 16 points for Iowa State in the fourth quarter against Kansas last week. This is a team, to his point, that gets out to good starts, but then the team they're playing runs them down. So I would expect BYU to come out and be focused on defense and look to get stops and then build the offense. I would be a bit surprised if we saw a game in the first quarter where you've got bombs down the field out of BYU and, Darius Lassiter or whoever you want to point to is just having, these huge gash plays. I would fully expect BYU to come out and look to run the football, establish possession, establish control in the game, and force Kansas into a position where they're going to have to throw to stay in this game. Because if you do that, you're going to win this game comfortably. But if you allow Kansas to get ahead of you, if you allow Kansas to turn around and hand the football off, if you allow Kansas to play the kind of football they want to play, you will be in trouble in this game.
Yeah, I have BYU winning it, but it's a come from behind win. And I think there's going to be a lot of offense. And I think that halftime adjustments, as always, will determine this game. I don't think that BYU has ever seen a running attack like this. I think that you saw a little bit of it against Kansas State, but K-State made so many mistakes. Avery Johnson is who we thought he was. I think Jalen Daniels is a dynamic performer who I would agree, make him throw the football to win the game, and you will turn him over. And so the question is, what does Jay Hill have in his bag of tricks to force Kansas to throw the football? And I think you're going to have Glasgow and Kelly and that group of linebackers just have a phenomenal performance. And I think that Tyler Batty and Mangelson and that group up front is going to have to be really stout and really gap sound. And I think that if you are the BYU linebackers, I think it is absolutely critical you are disciplined at the edge. I think it is absolutely critical you do not overrun Jalen Daniels, not even one time. And I think you're exactly right. Force this to be Devin Neal running the football.
Yeah.
Force this to be, hey, Jalen, look, man, I understand you're a dynamic character. You run that football through this gap, and I'm going to put my helmet in your sternum.
Yeah.
I'm going to hurt you because it's 30 degrees and it hurts to play football. We're used to it. You're not.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of game you have to play. And I think if you get up on this team, let's say that you're up 28-10 at the half, you need to score 50 points in this game.
Mm-hmm.
You need to put these questions about, is Kalani a killer? I think that's a huge question mark on this.
The answer
on
to
this
that
ball
right now
club.
is no. That's the problem. Is the sentiment is no, you're not a killer, and that's where I think if you were to drop 50 on Kansas, then that gives people the option and the ability. It opens the door to, well, hey, Iowa State played a really close game with Kansas, but BYU dropped 50 on them, and it really wasn't all that close.
But here's my other question. Is this a trap game for BYU? I don't think that it is. You have never been in this position in the modern era of BYU football.
Mm-hmm.
You've never been in this position. You're undefeated. You are by a lot favored to win this league. You've never been in this position before. You've begged your way into this conference. You've borrowed your way into this conference. You have stole your way into this conference. You have earned your way into this conference. And now you're sitting on top of the Big 12 conference. There's no such thing as a trap game or a letdown. And it concerns me a little bit that I see Jake Retzlaff doing all these interviews this week, but I believe in that kid's mental acuity. I believe in that kid's maturity.
Mm-hmm.
It concerns me a little bit that BYU has a ton of hype right now. How many of those kids are on social media reading the press clippings? That's how you lose games. You don't lose games on Saturday night in Provo. If you're BYU, when are you losing the Kansas game?
Mm-hmm.
Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Yeah, when you got comfortable in your preparation.
When you've lost the edge and maybe you're not running that route as hard in practice. Maybe you're not lifting all them weights as hard as you used to because now you're undefeated and you know you're going to the championship game, but you got to win these next 3. I don't think that's who Jay Hill is. I don't think that's who Kalani Sitake is.
Agreed.
I think Kalani Sitake is sending the message, this is where we are. We didn't come this far to simply come this far. We didn't lift all them weights to just come this far. We didn't run all those sprints to just come this far. BYU will win this game. It may not be pretty. They may not always lead it, but BYU at the end of the night at home in cold conditions on a Saturday night, KU's dreams of being a spoiler come to Provo to die. I think BYU wins 37-34.
Man, that would be a roller coaster of a game.
Because you have to side with BYU. I mean, this kicker,
dude,
has he missed ever in his entire? I think he was kicking field goals in the womb.
Yeah,
like has this kid ever missed?
No.
They have a lot of advantages.
I think that. I mean, I like a mid-30s point total for BYU. Absolutely. This team has consistently scored over 30 points. The Utah game was one of the first times they struggled to break 20. So, that's the best defense in the Big 12. They played like it. I think I'm kind of with you. I trust that Kalani Sitake and Jay Hill have the team ready to perform. I think that, and again, we talk about Aaron Roderick every week. The play calling is what it is, but I do think offensively, his guys all year have been ready to run the game plan they've put out, right? Like maybe we disagree with the game plan a little bit and like how you went about calling the plays and situational stuff, but it's never been a thing this year where we've talked about, well, they just didn't really look committed to what they were trying to do. This team, I feel like on both sides of the football and in special teams, by the way, is completely sold and bought into, hey, if we do our job at a really high level, we're going to beat the team on the other side of the line of scrimmage. And that's where I feel like in this game, BYU understands, hey, we came out of the Utah game. There was a lot of drama in that game. We need to come out and prove a point this week. And that's why, for me, I feel like this is going to be a 35, 38 point performance for BYU. And I think they hold this Kansas team to the mid-20s. I think they win this game. I think they take control in the second half. And I think they pull away from Kansas mid-third quarter.
And I think the biggest question that I have about KU is, can your defense match your offense? Because, again, I pointed this out yesterday. Look at all the top offensive teams in the conference when it comes to yards per game. UCF, Texas Tech, TCU, Iowa State, Cincinnati, K-State, Kansas, Baylor, and then at number 9, it's BYU. And then it's Arizona State and Colorado. The best teams in this league don't have the best offenses.
Right.
But what do they have? They have balanced defenses. BYU is 3rd in the league in defense, giving up 323 yards a game. KU is 11th. Giving up 382 yards a game.
And I think your point that you've been making all week about altitude and getting tired, that's where I think BYU starts to walk away from them in the second half. I think that you will see KU, they'll get off to a good start. They'll run the football, feel some momentum. They'll get tired in the second quarter. BYU will have a big second quarter. They'll come out in the second half and KU will be completely flat. BYU will run away.
And when I say altitude, when has KU at any point in this year been 1,000 feet above sea level? Illinois, UNLV, West Virginia. And I would remind you, at Illinois, Their road games at Illinois, at West Virginia, at Arizona State, at Manhattan, Kansas. And then in Kansas City for Iowa State, Houston, TCU, UNLV, and Lindenwood. So you're saying the answer's never. The answer's never, ever. Right? And I think that that's a real thing. I think when you look at the way that Kansas plays, I think you're looking at, I think their highest altitude was Morgantown, West Virginia, which is 960 feet. I was looking last night above sea level. Well, I got news for you, and let me just double check for you.
Yeah.
Provo, Utah. I'm gonna guess, and I could be wrong about this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more than 961 feet.
Yeah.
It's 4,550 feet above sea level. Your lungs are going to bleed. It's cold air that constricts your chest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is very difficult to expect Kansas to perform at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
I think BYU wins the game, and I think it's going to be very interesting. BYU has Connor Payback too. Well, they lost a lineman this week as well. I think that's huge. So I don't know. We'll see. Phil Venzer. I was amazed to find out how many Big 12 podcasts there are on YouTube. A ton.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think we get pigeonholed as you're this show.
Right.
Are we a Big 12 show? I have no idea. Do we prep our show to be a Big 12 show? We don't. But when BYU and Colorado are sitting on top of the Big 12, we're a Big 12 show.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a ton of Ohio State, Big 10 on this show. We don't talk as much SEC. We talk a lot of Mountain West Pac-12. Like, I don't know. Are we, which is fine. Craig G. They are reading the disrespect that's motivating them so far. We know that. Well, there's certainly that. He says 33-10 BYU.
Be a good win.
BYU needs to forget about their record and just go 1 week at a time because they get ahead of themselves. They could get knocked off. I think that's exactly right. 34-23 BYU, Norge says. It'd be amazing. Geoff. I read on Twitter this week that a dude named his baby William 10 hours after Will Ferrin made that kick. Please don't name your kids after athletes. Saquon's a good name, but don't name, John Kurtz does a good Big 12 slanted show as well. He does a very good show. John Kurtz in Kansas City with the K-State guys. Connor Pay, I read that one. The eye patch. So it's set in stone. TDS wins this game because of altitude. Did I just say that? That's not what I said. Did they win the game last week because of altitude? No, they won that game last week because Utah held JoJo Phillips. That's why they won that game. I didn't say they're going to win because of altitude. I said it's a major advantage because you've had Kansas, who's not played at almost any altitude all year.
And it's not easy to do.
So it's not easy to do at all. BYU needs to get ready for their loss to ASU. Forks up. Dude, that's the game. And we've talked about this. That's the game that scares me most.
Yeah.
If I'm a BYU fan, that trip to the Dillinghams is what I'm worried about. That's what I would be worried about. You are damn sure not a Big Ten show. Yeah, I know, right?
SEC show, bro. Come on.